forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Dace.
Welcome to Bigger 10. I am Steve Dace, joined by my co-host, never partner, the one and only Aaron McIntyre. We're doing this a little differently this week. Aaron, we had to make do with the way Big Ten Media Days came down this week, later in the week after our production days, typically for the show. And of course, we wanted to cover them and not have this be dated material. So to make that work, you and I are doing this portable in each of our own man caves as opposed to our state-of-the-art studio. So we're going to try our best to make this work. Are you ready to go?
You bet. Yeah. I love the off season. We talked about that all the time. This like 2-week period when the NFL training camp and Big Ten media days, all the media days, and then, fall camp starts. This is the concentration of the most wonderful time of the year, in my opinion.
Amen. Like, we're underway now. We are underway now. We had media days are done. Fall camp start this next week. We made it through another summer. All right. So yep. I'm going to go through our Twitter feed at Bigger 10 and pick out just some of the things that I think were the most noteworthy or newsworthy items. And we'll discuss them if you're okay with that. But the first one is kind of obvious. And it doesn't directly involve the Big Ten, but it certainly does indirectly. So Tony Petitti, our new conference commissioner, who's a former television executive at all the major networks. He's worked at all of them. And he's the new Big Ten commissioner. He gave his first address as commissioner this week. And he certainly came across more engaging than his predecessor, but that's a pretty low bar. But one of the things that he said, when asked about further expansion, he said, hey, right now, the directive that I have from our presidents is to focus on blending USC and UCLA into our league and to worry about that right now, right? The problem is, he gave that statement about 10 in the morning. Aaron, if this event had started at like 1 in the afternoon, he might have given a different statement, because I would imagine Tony Petitti has gotten some phone calls here in the last 24 to 48 hours that he was not anticipating, because out of nowhere, so the Pac-12 has its media day last weekend. George Kliavkoff, their commissioner, comes out full Tariq Aziz, full Baghdad Bob. It's all good. We're all good. We've got a deal coming. I can't tell you what the terms are or when it will get here. He even goes on to say the longer this goes on, the more bidders we're going to have. Okay.
Yeah, that's when I knew they are screwed. Yeah. When they tried to spin this as, hey, the longer this goes on, the more options we have. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
No, it is not. No, it's been 8 months they've been waiting to do a deal. Nothing has happened. And so now what's occurred is Colorado, out of nowhere, like about 4 hours after Tony Petitti gave that statement, Colorado out of nowhere said, we're out. One out, going back to the Big 12. And the Big 12 that night extended an invitation. You and I are taping this Thursday night. This morning, Colorado's Board of Regents unanimously accepted that invitation. They gone. And Brett McMurphy is reporting at Action Network, and he's about the best college football reporter in the country. He is reporting what's pretty obvious. You can't have a league of 13 teams, okay, which is what they have right now. And so what he is reporting is they're going to add 1 to 3 more teams. They got to have an even number of teams. And so now there's all kinds of crazy reports, but it's very clear that the loss of USC to our league killed the Pac-12, and it's just taken a little longer for the body to decompose than people thought. And so this has ramifications for our league. There is some talk that Oregon and Washington may actually go to the Big 12, that the Big 10 does not want them. And we've always looked at this question with Oregon and Washington from a scheduling standpoint. I wonder if we should look at it more from a branding standpoint. Like, UCLA and USC may decide we don't want any other Western teams because we are in the Power 2. We've got Oregon and Washington coming into California and rating our recruits every year. Well, we're in the Power 2, and we're the only California representative in the Power 2. we've dropped them to below us basically. We want that. We'll deal with how to get the rowing team to a game at Rutgers a couple times a year. We want all those recruits to ourselves without any other West Coast competition. They may decide that. I do know from people I know that the Big Ten really wants to go south. That's really what its next target will be. And I think the first step of that was Miami getting into the prestigious AU Academic Association about a month ago. So let me just stop there. That's kind of where the scene is right now. We're all waiting to see, just so people know, by the way, I should mention this, the Pac-12 has no TV deal after this season. So there's no gain of rights. There's no penalty. Everybody's a free agent. Everybody can go wherever they want right now, provided they've got a place to go. And so that's why I would imagine a lot of folks are scrambling right now. So the floor is yours. What do you think?
Well, as has been noted by numerous people, the Pac-12 has nobody to blame but themselves. I mean, they played themselves this entire way. They could have poached when the Big 12 was in a place of weakness a couple of years ago. They could have poached any number of teams, you would have thought. But as you pointed out, I think on the Bigger Ten accounts, they couldn't stand the thought of Waco or Ames or sharing resources with those types of places. So they have nobody to blame but themselves. Secondly, if you are Oregon, and that's specifically who I'm told, or who I'm not told, but who I've seen rumored the most, is this kind of mystery team outside of Colorado that is kind of surprisingly looking at the Big 12. If you're Oregon, basically, if you've been in a Power 5 conference for the past 10 to 15 years, the facilities wars are over. Everybody's got the state-of-the-art facility. Everybody's got that now. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, TV money is still really important because, money is apparently the only thing that drives football these days. But that was.
But you're going to use that money to buy players now, not buy locker rooms. You're going to buy players with that money now.
Yeah, especially. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But at the same time, if you're Oregon specifically, Phil Knight, I don't know how old he is. I know he's old, but I have to think that his money's going to be around for a long time. So even if you take a hit on TV revenue, I still feel like you're going to be, with all that Nike money, you're still going to be in a really good position to buy those recruits. So then it becomes, do I want to be brand number 5 or 6 in the Big Ten? Or do I want to step in on day one and rebrand number 1 or 2? And probably one. One. Number 2, I would argue, is BYU. I can't think of another brand that's bigger right now in the Big 12. I wonder if that's kind of the calculation that's going on, if it's true that the rumors, kind of the unlikely team is Oregon. I kind of wonder if that's what they're saying. I could step into this league, be guaranteed, almost guaranteed a playoff spot every single year if we continue to perform at, somewhat of a level that we've been expected to. So that's kind of what I'm wondering, is that second team. And again, it's unbelievable. We thought the Big 12 was done. And we thought even before I, kind of became sentient and aware of the larger college football world outside of Iowa, there have been several times, as I understand, that the Big 12 was done. They're done now.
Several times I thought they were done. Yes.
Yeah, this last time losing Texas and Oklahoma, you thought, okay, they're actually in a position of a pretty good power. And once again, I would reiterate, especially if they can get Oregon and Arizona, I would really love the Utah too, just for the Utah-BYU rivalry. Dude, I can't wait to see Big 12 after dark. It's going to be the most entertaining conference. Not the best, but the most entertaining conference.
Well, what the final thing on this, what the Big 12 did, starting with Bob Bowlesby, a guy I've known for a long time, back to when he was the AD at the University of Iowa, and then with their new AD, or the new commissioner, whose name escapes me, but is clearly a real go-getter, is they didn't accept their fate. They took matters into their own hands and they acted, and they got ahead of the Pac-12 by negotiating their TV deal right away. That they got less money, but they were solid. It was enough. It was enough to not have Kansas basketball say we got to go to the Big Ten. Okay, it was enough to keep people at home, and so they were in a solid footing. The Pac-12 held back. They thought they were the ones holding the cards, and what they should have been doing, all right, is they had the girl with the curl. They had the hot girl in school there in USC, and they took her for granted. Right? They should have been schmoozing her, making sure she was good, because as long as they had her, they were calling the shots. But once they lost her, they should have realized right then, oh bleep, we're not. And you mentioned something I think is very important. A couple of years ago, the Big 12 went to the Pac-12 and offered them an alliance, which would have guaranteed the preservation of both leagues. And the elites at Berkeley and at Palo Alto just could not even, I can't even be in alignment with Lubbock, Texas and Ames, Iowa. All right, well, okay, you reap what you sow. And that is what is going on right now. All right, so let's move on. That's all we know about that aspect of this for now. And let's get to the league and what went on this week. And I think some of the news that came out of there, let's start with Northwestern. And I love my fits. I don't think you and I've even said this to you yet off the air. I have been very media suspicious of this story from the beginning. But I must say, if you've got over 30 players coming forth, something happened there. I'm at the point now of saying something must have occurred there. Okay. But the way this school has managed this now, they send this poor guy, Dave Braun, who's the interim coach, who's been there like 10 minutes. And he goes out there and answers questions from the media before the AD and the president of the university do. What a bunch of douche nozzles there. And that entire thing is just has been clearly mismanaged this entire time, Aaron. Whatever the truth is, I don't know that maybe we'll ever know. Whatever it was amazingly mismanaged and continues to be.
Yeah. First of all, 30 former players, but at the same time, you've retained all the staff who would know all about this.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
And no one's been charged with assault, Aaron. The hazing that was alleged is sexual assault. No one's been charged with a crime. How is that?
So again, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Secondly, if at least the school president and maybe the athletic director as well, because ultimately it was the school president, as I understand, it was his call whether or not to get rid of Pat Fitzgerald. If this entire saga doesn't end with him also having his head on the guillotine, Washington would be a good replacement for Northwestern. That's my take.
Preach.
Secondly, I really liked David Brown. I really liked what I heard from the podium. Now, granted, he did look like a deer in the headlights. I got to hear a few of these coaches' interviews on Sirius XM as well. I really like this guy. I mean, he's stepping into an impossible situation, and he's trying to make the best of it. And his attitude is basically, you know what? I believe God put my family in this situation at this time, for this moment, for this scenario. I really respect that. So I really liked what I heard from him. But yeah, he did look like a deer in the headlights. And how you rally a team after something like this when you are so young. He is a really young guy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hats off to him for being willing to step in and actually being willing to field questions from the media on something that really predated him. I think that shows a lot about his character. Now, whether that translates onto the football field, overall, I came away with a really good impression of David Brown and the exact opposite impression of the entire Northwestern athletic department, including the president.
Completely agree. Of course, now we're going to have our Me Too moment, okay? And so now we're going to go after Minnesota and PJ Fleck. And I have to tell you, the best interview I heard of any of it, and it's tough to beat James Franklin in an interview, man. I mean, James Franklin is like, and it doesn't come across as fake. It's like, you can tell he really enjoys talking to people. He's really engaging. He's charismatic, okay? I mean, James Franklin is aces in an interview. James Franklin in interview is Norm at the end of a bar, all right? He's dominating. He is dominating that tap, okay? And James Franklin is going to dominate that mic. That being said, the best interview, and I heard all the private interviews that I could for all the coaches, and I watched all their interviews on BTN. The interview that PJ Fleck gave on Sirius XM, where he just disemboweled this attempt to Fitzgerald, his program. I mean, he just annihilated it. And then you had the current players come out, and a lot of other players come out and say complete garbage. So, I mean, the big charge was they made us run if we did bad stuff. And we thought it was cult-like that the coach wanted a standing ovation when he walked into a room. I mean, was he?
Do you even PJ Fleck, dude? Do you know who this guy is?
Do you even football, dude? Do you even football? What a bunch of degenerate whips who couldn't hack it and are disgruntled about it. And so I was glad to see Minnesota just absolutely squash that right away. And the point that he made, too, which was, we've had 27 academic All-Americans in the history of Minnesota football, which goes back like 130 years. 27 of them. 9 of them have happened in the 5 years I've been the coach here. All right. We had 3 9-win seasons ever in Minnesota football since 1935, when we won 3 national championships in a row. We've had like 5 9-win seasons. I've had like 3 of them. And I love the way that he just confronted it head on and dismissed it with prejudice. That was well done, I thought.
I don't know, Steve. I mean, it might be possible that like every team in the Big West is just, led by, racist,
Iowa was led by a Klansman coach a
misogynistic
couple of years
psychopath.
ago.
It could be possible that every team in the Big Ten West, or it could just be possible that a lot of this is just a bunch of BS. And you said basically everything I wanted to say about this. I'm a PJ Fleck, I guess, agnostic. I'm not really a huge fan, but I'm not really, he doesn't wear on me that much. But I was also really glad to see him, even in the main session on BTN, when Scott Dochterman, this is not about Scott Dochterman. I love Scott Dochterman. He's the best writer on the Iowa Beat, but asking the same type of question, and he disemboweled that as well, just saying, no, not on my watch. I'm not just going to let this go on. And, we'll let the Pat Fitzgerald thing play out, but I wish Fitzgerald would have gotten that opportunity as well, but he obviously didn't.
Some other things that stood out to me, Matt Rule talking about player buy-in, and he was very honest, and because this is a guy that knows a lot about taking over rebuilding programs, and I heard him say, Aaron, flat out, a lot of times, because he was asked, you get this pattern, and the pattern is that your first year is a struggle, and then the second year your team really makes a big jump. Why is that? And he was brutally honest, man. I mean, he said, hey, I was out of coaching, and so I wanted this Nebraska job bad. I spent weeks scouting their roster. I spent weeks watching film on all their recruits in the last 3 classes. And a lot of times when you take over a struggling program, you can't get upperclassmen buy-in. You didn't recruit those guys. They want out. They don't believe in it. And so you got to figure out early on, I got to build my program then on the guys that want to be here and will be here long term. And so you play the young guys. And that usually means a struggle in the first year. He goes, but this time I had this team so well scouted with weeks to prepare to take the job before they hired me. And we've got great senior buy-in. And I don't think I'm going to have to do that this time. I think I'm going to be able to play a lot of the guys that were here. And remember, they'd had like 4 top 25 recruiting classes in a row. Now, when I saw them in the spring, this didn't look like, Bob Devaney, Tom Osborne, Nebraska. Hell, it didn't look like Frank Solich, Nebraska. Okay. But that's not a 4-8 football team either. It's somewhere in between. And I think it's conceivable he could get them to a bowl game in his first year. And they haven't been to one of those since 2006. Barack Obama was president, Aaron, the last time that Nebraska went to a bowl game. Think about that.
Yeah, you mentioned James Franklin being kind of hard to beat in these pressers. I don't know. I thought his presser and most of his pressers are filled with a lot of coach speak. Having said that, though, James Franklin, he was asked a question about having a QB battle for the first time in a while. And he said, oh, well, we have a quarterback battle every year. And then the lispy reporter tried to correct him and like, well, it's different this year. And James Franklin kept saying, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I love that moment. Of all the coaches, though, I thought Matt Rule did the best. And I watched every single coach interview on BTN as well as their presser, except for Jim Harbaugh, although I did catch a little bit of that today, and the Q&A for Fickell. And I thought he by far impressed me the most. He was prepared. He has a plan. It wasn't the typical, what are your goals for year one? It wasn't the meandering responses. He's on the money. And I know that you noted on the Bigger Ten Twitter account or X account, whatever it's called now, Jerry DiNardo thought this was a perfect fit for Nebraska. And I can't argue with that. But at the same time, I couldn't argue that with Scott Frost either. So
yeah, we all said that
with a grain of salt, but he was very impressive on a kind of a personal level, as personal as you can get in these environments, even more so than I ever thought with Scott Frost. So I think he knows what he's getting into here. I think he knows what the expectations are. He's not tempering them too much, but at the same time, I think he is confident where he can go, and he should be. He's got a track record to prove that.
I thought the coach that had the most swagger, and hey, man, Brett Bielema never lacks for confidence, right? Never lacks for confidence. But for a guy that lost a ton of talent to the NFL, now they're still bringing back a pretty good offensive line, and I think one of the best defensive lines in the country. I mean, he seemed really confident, I thought, Aaron. That was the guy that he went out of his way to talk up his team. I thought that was the guy that did the, every year you can kind of tell who's kind of trying to, temper expectations, and then who basically is saying, hey, you guys forgot about Dre, basically. All right. And Brett Bielema seemed to be that coach to me. I mean, he seemed to really be selling it that, you guys are overlooking us. We're going to be pretty good.
I kind of got that inclination as well. And having not seen him too many times in pressers, I don't know if this is his MO. But at the same time, taking over what he took over and then building it the last couple of years, the last couple of seasons, into something that is, you don't just overlook them anymore. I mean, ask your Wolverines, ask my Hawkeyes. You can't overlook them anymore. Mm-hmm. That already by itself says a lot. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that the brief history of him at Illinois, it doesn't surprise me that he might be a little bit prickly about being overlooked, because they are being overlooked right now.
We're not going to talk too much Michigan, by the way, folks, because that's a whole episode of Michigan podcast that's right here on the channel. They get their own show. So we're going to focus on the rest of the teams in the league. Let's talk about a couple of teams in Michigan's division, though, where the coaches said things that made me kind of raise the Spock one eyebrow a little bit. Mel Tucker, by the way, his suit game, bro, on point, all right? But he said top to bottom, this is the most talented roster he has had so far at Michigan State. And I got to tell you, I don't see that, okay? But I gave that one the Spock one eyebrow when he said that. Aaron, what about you?
That sounds like projection to me. That sounds like somebody who's maybe willing that to be true. I don't know how you get rid of your number one offensive weapon and maybe even number two offensive weapon and still say that this is your most talented roster, especially when your first year you had a guy who's playing in the NFL and doing very well right now. That strikes me as projection. I could be wrong, but that strikes me as a masterclass in projection.
Ohio State coach Ryan Day, quote, "We're looking for offensive tackles," unquote. And I don't know, maybe it's just a turn of a phrase, but I don't remember the last time I heard an Ohio State coach say, "Yeah, we're looking." I mean, maybe the fact they took a transfer from San Diego State late, like not in the early transfer cycle, like when the first wave of the most coveted guys come out, but post spring. All right, the second, transfer wave, when they took a guy, that may have been a clue right there, that because they just lost two guys to the NFL draft, and one of them was obviously a first-round pick. But you got new quarterbacks there, pass-heavy offense. That kind of just stood out to me. That's not where we're looking for a kicker. I mean, in the NFL, that's the second or third highest paid position in the league behind quarterback and probably pass rusher is offensive tackle. And to hear the coach in terms of recruiting, the premier recruiting program in our league come right out and say, "Hey man, we're on the lookout for offensive tackles." I don't know. That kind of just stood out to me. Maybe I'm making too much of it as a Michigan fan.
Well, I've kind of gone back to this when it comes to Ohio State and particularly their offense this season. They have so much talent on the outside at wide receiver. How bad could their quarterback really be? I mean, if they're going to have good quarterbacks, it's not going to be all on his shoulders when they have so much talent. Now, when you add what you just said in there, the quarterback still has to have that. That was what I was saying, was under the assumption that their offensive line would be adequate and decent. If you're looking for tackles, we're not talking about guard. We're talking about tackles here. Okay, can you find a guy who's going to be able to pick up the blitz from the outside, from the blind side? That is a yo. And so, yeah, that to me, that would be a little bit of a yikes moment. Hopefully they can find some guys who take some strides during fall camp, but goodness gracious. Another thing, our boy Mark Rogers over on Michigan Podcast, Voice of College Football, you have him on every week during the season.
He got a lot of FaceTime, man.
He did. He got a lot of FaceTime on BTN. He was able to ask Ryan Day, and I thought it was a great question, and Ryan Day agreed, actually. That's kind of rare that you ask an actual X's and O's question and the coach agrees that it's an actually good question, which might be an in and of itself. But Mark Rogers basically asked on defense, are you looking for your guys to fit the scheme? Are you trying to temper the scheme around your guys? And he hesitated, and Ryan Day hesitated, and he's like, well, that's a good question. That was another thing that stuck out to me as well. It's year 3 of Knowles. I think that's his name. That's
year 2.
Season 2.
Yeah.
And you're still trying to figure out what you're doing on defense. That kind of stuck out to me too.
By the way, we got to double back to Illinois. How do we forget about Jim Leonard? But remember, he's not the defensive coordinator. He is the senior defensive analyst. Yes.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, you lost one of the best defensive coordinators in our sport, who of course now is the head coach at Purdue and proved to be a complete wunderkid as a DC. And you bring Jim Leonard in. Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah. And he said he's going to be with his family on the weekends. He's not going to be at the games.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know, Illinois. If you're
they
looking
got cell
for
phones.
a surprise team,
he's going to be with his family.
Texting
in the booth, brother. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been adamant when it comes to Wisconsin. Everybody's talking about the offense and how that's going to be different. Leonard's a hell of a defensive coordinator, or was at Wisconsin. I mean, that was their team the last several years as their offense kind of sputtered, at least at the quarterback position. They could still hang their hat on the defense. That's a massive loss for Wisconsin. I don't know how they're going to be on that side of the ball. And for Illinois to kind of poach Leonard as an analyst, that could be big news. And we could be looking back at this as being, hey, that might be one of the turning points for Illinois football. Who knows?
Since you brought up Wisconsin, let's go there next. If there was a silver, if we did win, place, or show for suit games, I'd put Luke Fickell in the number 2 spot. And he came across very well. He's a commanding presence. I don't think that shocks anybody. But I also think it's just mystifying that no one knows. Like you mentioned, their defense. They're bringing a lot of guys back on defense. But, Aaron, they're used to playing complementary football, right? Where they know the offense is going to play ball control, field position, not put them in a lot of terrible positions. Now you don't know that. I mean, they could still have a great defense, but now you're giving up 24 points a game because you're running tempo and your defense is out there more. I just think for them, they in the Cleveland Plain Dealer poll, they were picked to win the West. I don't know, man. I just think there's a lot of questions about what is that going to actually look like. I completely believe in Luke Fickell, but what is it going to look like in year 1? This is a massive scheme transition. They've been running the same system for 30 years.
Yeah, regardless of whether Jim Leonard stuck around to coach the defense and coordinate the defense at Wisconsin, we would still be asking the same question, I think, because of the complementary aspect of what you just talked about. If you want to look at, what a complementary team looks like that's not playing complementary football, look Iowa at Ohio State last year. The defense was still really, really good. It's just you can't be put into situations over and over and over again and expect the defense to stand up. Now, do I think that Wisconsin is going to get Ohio State versus Iowa circa 2022 every single game? No, that's not what I'm saying. It's just to illustrate, I'm using hyperbole to illustrate the fact that what is this going to look like at Wisconsin? If their offense isn't right up to speed or somewhat 75% up to speed, to where Luke Fickell would like it off the bat, you could see some games where their offense puts their defense in some difficult positions, and you just can't expect the steel curtain to hold up in difficult positions week after week and drive after drive. It's just impossible. So again, this comes back to, I think they're probably the most, you want to call it mystifying, interesting teams going into this season, the Big Ten.
All right, let's finish it up talking about your club. Sorry about that. Bump the camera there. My apologies. It's not your fault if you're watching. It's mine. Let's talk about your team, Iowa. I thought two things that stood out to me. For those that don't know, you don't live in our home state, both Iowa and Iowa State are facing gambling investigations right now from the NCAA and potential suspensions. Now, this came up a lot at Big 12 Media Days with the Cyclones because there was a player or two that everybody thought, Aaron, that was obvious they would bring that they did not. So the assumption is those guys are part of the investigation. There's a lot less known about who may or may not be part of the investigation at Iowa. Kirk seemed to indicate he didn't think it'd be a lot of players. He also clearly lobbied the NCAA saying, hey, it's a total, basically pointing out it's a really double standard to have games sponsored by DraftKings, okay, and FanDuel, and then suspend players for gambling, okay? And then he was asked about what I think is going to be the most watched stat in all of college football this year, and I mean it. All right, and unless somebody goes like Joe Burrow, which could happen, Caleb Williams is back for another year. But unless we're looking at something like that, someone goes Joe Burrow or Barry Sanders, the number one stat people are going to be watching is 25 points per game at the University of Iowa. And so he was asked quite a bit about that and his the future for his son Brian as the OC, because they've also got a new AD coming in there. And Kirkman was very complimentary of the old AD, as he should have been. All right. But now they had a new person coming in, and it'll be an outsider. They've not hired anybody yet. But your thoughts on those two? Those are really the two big angles, I thought, for your Hawkeyes.
Well, Noah Shannon was actually one of the three players selected to go to Indianapolis for media days. And he opted on his own accord because he's a part of this investigation. He opted to step aside. So that's one player that we know of. We don't know of, what the severity is or how many or which players exactly are at risk. It's just, I sense some frustration from parents because this has been going on for months now. And he's not going to play guys. He's not going to play guys if they could be getting suspended because they could come back in and forfeit games or nullify games if you played guys who should have been suspended. So I sense some frustration there on that. I also got the picture that I find hard to believe that Kirk Ferentz didn't know that Noah Shannon was a part of this investigation and yet still invited him to come to Indianapolis for media days. And if he did know, my inkling is that he doesn't really feel like this is going to be, a big consequence. It's not going to be the accountability is not going to be that big of a deal. But that's just kind of my 2 cents. As far as the offense and the points per game thing, yeah, I mean, we're just going to have to watch it play out. This is the season of optimism. Obviously, if you don't come to Indianapolis or Dallas Fort Worth or Nashville or I think it was Las Vegas, where the Pac-12 media day was a little odd. It was very rushed, very odd. But if you don't come to any other media day with optimism, I don't know. It's like you like to say all the time, nobody is smaller, slower, and weaker this time of the year.
Right.
Nobody's saying,
right.
I wish it was any time other than, July, August. I wish it was
I'm
January,
in the worst shape of
February.
my life.
Yeah. Having said all of that, I did sense a little more optimism than I'm accustomed to from Kirk Ferentz himself. I mean, going out of his way to praise Cade McNamara and praising his leadership. There were, there's a defensive lineman on the team who could not stand McNamara the first couple of weeks. Now they're inseparable. Those are the types of things that you want to hear, especially when you've got transfers coming in. And so, again, the Kool-Aid, I'm starting to drink it just a little bit.
A quiet sense of confidence from Iowa City. Yes.
The quiet confidence in Fort Kennett. Yeah. But I think the non-conference, particularly Utah State and Western Michigan, that's going to help with the point total. I should hope quite a little bit this year. I mean, Western Michigan, I think, is picked to finish last in their division. Utah State is not good at all in playing them out the gates. I should hope that should help with the point total for this season. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting to say the least stat to keep an eye on.
All right, I think that's about it, man. I think we wrapped it up. So I think we covered a lot of ground here. Thank you guys for putting up with kind of a mid show from a technological presentation standpoint. Hopefully the information and content, though, was worth your while. Please, if it was, remember to like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, share. If you're watching us here on YouTube or listening to the podcast version, help us to find more Big Ten sports fans just like you. You can follow us in between episodes on Twitter or X or Twitter X, whatever the heck it's called now. At Bigger10 is where you'll find us there. At Bigger10 on Twitter, Twitter X, whatever. All right, I'm Steve Dace for Aaron McIntyre. We'll see you next time right here on Bigger10.